Welcome everyone to Fully Booked and to Gaming FTL, where today I'm going to be interviewing the authors of some very exciting Vampire the Masquerade World of Darkness books, novellas. Is the word you're using for them, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And so just quickly to explain what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be talking about Walk Among Us, which is an audiobook. We're also going to be talking about the authors in general. And this is also hopefully the first in a line of streams with other streamers and authors talking about the things that they're working on, called Fully Booked. There's a title up there and everything. So keep an eye out for more Fully Booked streams. And yeah, let's begin by introducing our wonderful authors, starting with Cass. Hi, welcome.
Hello.
Tell us a bit about yourself. I was very excited to read Hammers on Bone, so please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Oh God, I always miss something when I do it. Let's see. I am a scriptwriter currently in Ubisoft Montreal. I have a cosmic horror noir series called Persons Non Grata that is currently out. I have a book series called Rupert Wong, Cannibal Chef, and as you can guess, it's about a cannibal chef. I've done tabletop RPG writing, poetry, tie-in fiction for Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K. Used to be a journalist, worked in business development. Do not recommend the last unless you really like alcohol.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And we're going to move on to Genevieve Gornichec. Have I said your name right?
Yeah, Gornichec. I know, it's a whole thing.
Okay. Well, welcome. Tell us about yourself and some of the things you've done.
So my debut novel is coming out next February. It's called The Witch's Heart, and it's a retelling of a Norse mythology from like a random obscure side character named Angerboda, who was a wife of Loki, sort of. Loki's the big draw. Everybody likes Loki, so yeah. And that's really all I've done. I'm a barista at Starbucks, but I've always been into vampires, so this was a really fun project to work on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things here is like everyone's super into vampires. There's a new edition of Vampire the Masquerade. There's all these role play shows happening on Twitch, and I'm having a really good time. So yeah, hopefully everyone here is into vampires. Otherwise, you might get a bit bored. And last but by no means least, Kaelyn Starling. Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, aside from working on this Vampire the Masquerade project, I have a book come out last year, The Luminous Dead, which got nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, which was very exciting, about a lone caver and a very manipulative voice on her radio having exciting, traumatic experiences together. And I also have a Gothic horror novella, Yellow Jessamine, coming out from Neon Hemlock Press later this year. And then finally a math, Victorian surgery, and ritual magic book called The Death of Jane Lawrence, coming out from St. Martin's Press in 2021, which I'm very excited about.
Sweet. Okay, well, this is really exciting. I rarely get to interview authors, so I would like to start by asking you how the project came together. How did you all, did you all just, you were having coffee, Genevieve was serving up some nice coffee and was like, hey, you want to write a book with me, or what happened?
I wish I was that dignified.
Yeah, on my end, I'd already worked with the editor before. He was my editor for The Luminous Dead, and so he just sent out an email and was like, hey, do you want to sign this NDA so you can talk about a horror project? And I was like, sure. Yes, sure. And then I got to sign the NDA and saw what the project was and started screaming. So
sweet.
It was kind of similar on my end as well, as I haven't worked with David before. My agent sent me an email going, would you like to do this? Please sign the NDA. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? And it kind of got along. And then finally the name of the property was revealed, and Michael can't tell you. There were just 4 emails of gibberish from me before he sent me guys, a message going, does this mean you want to work on this or are you having a stroke? Yes, please.
And I actually had a similar experience to that. My agent reached out to me and she's like, hey, I found out about this thing. You want to find out about it too? It's about vampires, but she didn't say vampire. I signed the NDA and then I found out it was capital V vampire.
Oh.
Yeah, and they actually did. They told us, or at least they told me from the beginning, there were going to be 2 other authors, but we actually did not interact until our stories were pretty much finished. We were sort of working alone, and the process was more like we got to throw ideas at the World of Darkness team and see what they liked, and then they sort of sent us off to write those ideas, which was interesting because that meant we had no real idea what the others were going to be like. We were trusting them to sort of have picked a group of stories together, but we're still distinct. So
awesome. I remember that meeting with the Paradox team. I think David must have been incredibly busy because we went into the meeting and the guys were like, so have you ever worked, like, do you know anything about Vampire the Masquerade? And started babbling about the source books I've contributed to. And there was this long pause where the guy was like, I guess you don't need the introduction then. I'm like, no.
When I did my call of Paradox, because of time zones, David from Voyager couldn't be on the call, and it was 5 a.m. I think here.
Oh God.
No, I stayed up till 2 a.m. That's what it was. I stayed up till 2 a.m. to talk to them. But it was super fun that I could just start, yelling about the Book of Nod, and the guy who wrote the Book of Nod was on the call.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, Genevieve. You got any stories?
No, not really. That was a really interesting call to be able to talk to the Paradox guys. Like I wasn't fully, I just had mentioned to my agent that I liked vampire stories and I had written one in high school, and that was kind of something I was super interested in. But I had never been fully immersed in the lore of vampire and the World of Darkness until this project. So that was it was like a crash course. It was awesome.
What?
Something I'd always wanted to learn about, but I'd never had anybody to play with or anybody else who was interested in it.
Oh, it was super cool that they just dumped us all of the source material in a Google folder.
Oh, that's
and they're like, hey, have fun. Go
I want
get
that
inspired.
Google folder. What? Oh, man. What is it that drew you each to Vampire? Because I know it's a huge influence and staple of the kind of vampire horror genre, as it were. So what drew you to it?
The Timisi. It was definitely the Timisi.
The
somebody introduced me to the idea of a clan of vampires who could actually turn people into suitcases, and I was so fucking in love with them ever since.
It was a prominently displayed set of source books at my comic store that I went to when I was 12, 13, 14. So picked it up because vampires were cool. I somehow got into reading Anne Rice when I was about 10, which is interesting when you're 10. But then I also had a friend at the time who was super into it and was into Clans of Misi specifically. I was more Clan Lasombra, which was very sad to learn that they aren't in the current edition. They have gone missing.
What, really? I don't know.
Yeah, the Sabbat mostly retreated to the Middle East, I think, to deal with some weird... Yeah, some antediluvian stuff. But that means you can't play as a Lasombra yet. I want to fall in love with my own shadow. Come on.
You're going to be so happy. They've finally released the Chicago by Night source book, and the Lasombra are in there.
Yes!
You play as them. Yeah, Genevieve.
For me, it was getting into lowercase v vampires was fully a product of movies like Underworld and Van Helsing, which came out when I was at a very formative age, and I was like, this is awesome. So that was what drew me to capital V vampire. But again, I had nobody to play with and nobody interested, so I never really got into it.
I found out later that my my godmother was super into Vampire the Masquerade in college.
Awesome.
To the point of, I believe I've heard, this may be apocryphal, that some people's tires got slashed when some in-game rivalry spilled out into the real world.
Oh, nice. That sounds like a really intense game of Vampire. Sweet. Cool. I mean, does anyone else want to talk about World of Darkness for the next hour? I mean, we could do that. I think I would love to move on to the book, though. It is obviously set in World of Darkness. So, yeah, you say you threw a bunch of ideas at World of Darkness team. Which ones did stick?
My first one actually stuck. I remember having a call with David, and he was like, you can come back to me with ideas. I was like, no, absolutely not. I want this newly embraced Ventru waking up in Iceland, dealing with the ticking time bomb of the sun, and just limited in terms of what he can do. And David was like, yes. And I was like, then I wish to strip him of all the vital needs that a human being or an undead person might need: shelter, food, all of those nice little things, and see what happens to the wreckage at the end of it. And he was like, okay.
Cool. Well, that sounds horrifying. Perfect.
Oh God, it is very much so.
Where did you say Iceland?
Iceland. It's in Reykjavik.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I've only been to Iceland once, but it's gorgeous there, but barren. So yeah, that if you don't know where you're going, I can imagine you can wander around like it's a desert.
Mm-hmm. Plus, with the Ventru's limitations in terms of what they can imbibe, it was just a moment of pure.
So you tortured a character and you made a book out of it.
Oh yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
On Twitter, you called it a Ventru power flex, and it is.
Yeah. No Ventru is going to enjoy reading that story, but yeah. Sweet.
Well, the young one needs to learn.
Well, this is where they need Gangrel to come and save them, and then never going to admit to that. But right, Genevieve, what was the idea that stuck for you, or I guess some ideas that didn't stick?
So mine, at the time that I was like crafting my pitch for this story, I was super nostalgic for my undergraduate experience and decided that I wanted my story to take place at my alma mater. And when I was reading the lore books, what really part of Vampire that I connected with most was the Anarchs. So I kind of was like, I want to write an Anarch story at Ohio State. And it just kind of snowballed from there. The main character is a lonely college kid struggling with depression who kind of gets taken under the wing of, the title, Vampire the Masquerade. Kind of connect the dots from there. The very obvious vampire.
Nice. So is that also about the kind of isolation of depression in a scholastic environment, or like?
Yeah, it's more like the kind of isolation where you're surrounded by other humans and you just still feel so alone. And I feel like people in that kind of situation are more vulnerable and more susceptible to, outside influences of, we'll say vampires here, but there are others.
People get into cults a lot of times.
Say what?
That's when people get into cults a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Disaffected people in their late teens.
Exactly. Yep, you said it.
Perfect. Kaelyn.
So I had a bunch of ideas that were close but not quite right. The first one that I really loved involved a newly turned vampire running away to her recently deceased wife's cabin in Wyoming, getting snowed in, being like, great, this is fine. I can deal with this on my own. I can have time to adjust. And then some hikers who had gotten lost in the blizzard need a place to stay. And so she ends up taking them in and then having to A, disguise what she is, and B, not kill them, which is harder. And they liked the idea, but it was a little bit too focused on isolation. They're like, okay, Cass has the isolation down. You don't need to do an isolation story. Okay. There was a couple other ideas that involved blood cults and were very gothic and very up the alley of what I would normally write. And they were like, nope, still too isolated. Come up with something else. So finally I was like, well, I live in Portland and I really enjoy farming memoirs. And so I'm going to write about a toreador who runs an arts and farming commune in northern Portland who takes care of sheep and people. And it kind of started as just sort of like a slice of life semi-farce. But when I got to actually writing it, it's still very slice of life, and you will learn a lot about sheep farming. But it also is the portrait of a vampire who thinks she's got everything under control. She's been around for a while, and then things just start spiraling, and she is not aware that they're spiraling until it's too late.
Nice. Okay.
I feel like if readers really want like deep, thoughtful stuff, they should stick with the things that you two have produced, because it seems so much more resonant than mine. Mine is just like, I just need to torture this tech bro across 25,000 words. That's it.
What's kind of like strange is that our stories really do have common threads in them, I think. Mine originally, one of my ideas was kind of have it like be half the obvious vampire and half my main character and kind of have two points of view. But David kind of steered me to really focus on just my main character. And the vampire story actually like began in Iceland. So like, that's a weird coincidence.
Really? I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So David is secretly the puppet master.
They gave us free reign with our story ideas. Sometimes when you do tie-ins, I've heard that they basically come to you with an outline and they say, please just write this. And in our case, we got to come up with things that were interesting to us, and they just signed off on it, which was great, although a little bit intimidating at first because, I mean, I had to go through so many iterations. But it's ended up with the things I wrote in my book are now canon for Portland. So if you set a Vampire the Masquerade game in Portland, you could use the details in the book, and they're official, about that? Which is wild. I had a moment where I sat down, like, I have a lot of responsibility right now to accurately capture Portland and what it would be like, because people might build on this in the future, and I want it to feel recognizable to other people who live here. So I ran it by a lot of my friends.
I'm now retroactively
very weird, sort of like,
terrified.
I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm working on, but I'm doing something about Portland. Here's this completely out of context detail. What do you think? Because I couldn't tell them until March that it was a Vampire the Masquerade project. But like, I had friends help me pick exactly which section of the former industrial area around the Portland airport would make the most sense to stick a commune in. And like, I even tried to get tours with several communes around town, but none of them ever actually set anything up with me. I think maybe the fact that I told them up front I was writing a horror novel maybe made them be like, oh, we're not going to give you ammo.
I mean, either that or they're definitely cults.
That too.
But yeah. What was, I guess, Cass, we saw your face when you realized that you're canon now. So how do you feel about people taking the things that you're about to release and using them in their own games and stories?
Ask me again in about a week. It just sank in.
Gotcha. I will schedule that tweet.
But yeah, it's kind of cool. It's weird. I don't know if it's true for you two, but to be able to like shape a fandom that has been around for so long, it's just a little bit staggering, a little bit surreal almost.
Absolutely.
I'm not ready for this kind of power, not remotely.
That just sank in for me.
Well, like, my story covers, who the Prince of Portland is, because it is a Camarilla city, which I think is going to make some people go, what? Unless you actually live in Portland, and then you're going to be like, yeah, it would be. Just because of how commercialized everything got very quickly starting in about 2005. But like, the Prince of Portland is defined. Some of the big players in that court are defined. And also there's a commune. Your players could go to the commune. there would probably be problems if they went to the commune. They can also be customers of the commune because the commune provides sheep, but it also provides certain other products to its stakeholders.
Delicately put.
Yeah.
That's excellent Vontrue branding there. So if you're not ready to have people like take the things that you've written and used in their own campaigns, is there anything in these books that you've a couple of you I know haven't had the opportunity to play, but is there stuff from previous vampire books or games that you've kind of brought in? Because I guess Cass, I don't know what they've written about Iceland, but you just need like a barren landscape and one person to torture, right? So
yes.
No courts, a little bit away from the vampire politics there.
There are a few things that's going on in there. I won't touch on it yet because I do not want to spoil my own book. But it kind of explores, at least a little bit, the idea of what happens when you're sort of comfortable in a very isolated space and you do not want to change the world order. And I think I've definitely intimated that the Ventrue have a little bit too much of a say about Iceland's airport. So that's going to be interesting to see if anyone uses that in their own campaigns.
Yeah. No.
I used a little bit of the Book of Nod. There's a bit where the main character, for various reasons, goes down a philosophical spiral about why out of the two, Cain ended up being the murderer and the vampire when Abel's the one who was slaughtering sheep all the time. Because it's kind of confusing when you see it, when you actually think of it like that. And since my whole thing is very pastoral, in fact, one of the vampires who does not work at the commune at one point yells at the main character for being the most stuck-up weirdo toreador, just obsessed with having her little pastoral idol that she manages, and can you please come back to reality and do something useful with your time? So.
And I didn't really use anything from previous none of the characters or anything, just because my main character is going into this story not knowing that vampires even exist. So there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for me to use the lore. And when I did name drop things, sometimes the guys from Paradox were like, too much, tone it down. I was like, that's fair. So
yeah, they were really emphatic about making it not read like a transcribed campaign. They really wanted it to feel like a very integrated setting where, you're not dropping the discipline names. Like I use, whatever. And I think that was a good move because it made us definitely reach for, ironically, the humanity of the characters, as opposed to at one point I was like, do you want me to write up a character sheet for my main character to make sure that the things I have her do are game feasible? And they're like, no. Please don't do that.
Nice.
That does make sense. I guess when you're working in a game, there are rules. There's very, very strict things you can and cannot do. But I guess the freedom of a novel is you get to make that stuff up, right?
And there's an element too in the 5th edition books, core books, that they advise your characters should not use the power terminology. They shouldn't have if you're playing an older vampire, they understand the structure of everything, but they have, everyone has kind of different names that they've come across for things, and they just sort of make it work because they're not reading from a playbook. So I think the thrust right now of this iteration is to make everything very sort of approachable and a little messy. And, they like having conflicting firsthand accounts of things because reality is malleable. And I really like that approach.
I will miss, though, those days of negotiating how one power or discipline works across 2-3 hours because there is a twink who knows the rules far better than the storyteller.
Yeah.
That person.
Yeah,
I was
I've
that
seen
person.
those debates. I mean, it's always going to happen, but yeah, I also appreciate that fact about the new edition. It's a lot of fun to just mess with stuff and see what happens. Okay, so I was thinking that we could do the readings, and then while that happens, we can collect a bunch of questions from chat. So if there is literally anything you want to ask that we haven't covered already about these books, about the opinions of the authors on World of Darkness or vampires or stories or anything like that, anything marginally relevant, I don't know. Yeah, please put them in chat, and we will do our best to answer them after we've gone through the sections that the authors are about to read. So, does anyone want to volunteer to start?
I guess I could do it. Jen looks so... I can't tell what Jen's expression is because she's kind of shrunken down, but she made the strangest face at me, and I'm now worried.
And I'm ready to whenever. So Jen, if you wanna hide until hide and prepare, you are welcome to hide and prepare.
I can start first. Borrowing this idea from Kaelyn, this is going to be a quick 5-minute thing on my part. And the excerpt picks up right after Duke gets embraced. He does not recall what happens, and he wakes up in Iceland. And previous to this, he had given the Ventru a long list of demands and expectations and insisted they had to accomplish all of this for him or he would not, join their ranks. Clearly, this was the worst mistake he ever made in his life, but we'll get back to that. Anyway, Duke woke up. This surprised him, as he had no recollection of entering sleep or of anything more concrete than the tectonic certainty he'd enjoyed himself slightly too much. Duke roused himself slowly in increments, with none of the vigor he was once accustomed to. An old man, his bones leaden with sleep. His disorientation grew as he took in the alien crispness of the air, a mineral smell that scrimshawed itself into the back of his throat and left his mouth dry and stinging with frost. The light was wrong too, lustrous yet diffused, as if poured through a ripple of clear water. Duke knuckled at his eyes with a hand, gaze combing the high walls that framed him, the blackout blinds along one narrow window. An adjacent stairwell curling upward to a loft of a second floor. The stucco walls were white, foliated at intervals with sheets of slate gold glass and no other ornamentation, which was, Duke decided, as he levered himself into an upright state, the reason for the strangeness of the lighting. Still, nothing could account for the decor. Aesthetic, rendered in cream and taupe, and almost entirely non-existent. From where he sat, Duke could see a marble banquet table, its gleaming surface jet black, a chair, and a hive of computer terminals and servers waiting for his attention. Some distance away, standing alone, a silver fridge that could have held 2 full-grown adult male bodies with space left to rent. But nothing else. His eyes went down, and for the first time, Duke came to realize precisely what he was sitting in. It was a coffin. A fucking corpse. Like the rest of the house's sparse furnishing, it was black, gorgeously burnished, angles razored, the sides as thin as cardboard. An inadequate layer of velvet cushioning lay beneath Duke, the house's only nod to the vanity of human comfort. This was the home he had asked for. He recognized it now. The design on the most molecular level was his, but it had changed since, had been reinterpreted through the lens of a funeral director, or more specifically, an asshole with an intent to vex. Fuck, said Duke, dragging shaking fingers to his limp hair. Jesus, fuck a cat. His blasphemy echoed disturbingly. The acoustics of his accommodations folding the sounds onto themselves, so the vibrations came slightly out of sync. Duke shuddered, inexplicably embarrassed. His gaze dropped again, landing finally on the yellow post-it note taped to the foot of his coffin. It said, "We're watching." "Welcome, Mr. Guillo. We've been waiting." Duke jolted at the satin purr of a woman's voice, its accent nominally Scottish, just enough of that burr to make her appealing, but not enough to obstruct understanding. She was tall, as sleek as new tech. All of her was. From the shining top knot to her makeup to the cat suit she wore, the material reflective as oil pebbled like skin. Even the smile, measured and patinaed with a daub of gold, gleamed like cutting-edge innovation. "Who are you?" A pause. "We are your staff, Mr. Guillo." "We." She had definitely said we, Duke thought. His focus clarified. He realized then there was not one woman, but 6 in straight-backed attendants. Each of them slim and sleeved in identical catsuits. They did not smile. Duke, after a moment, realized their eyes were all the exact same shade of verdigris. "Staff?" said Duke, deeply unsure. 5 of the women looked to the first of them to speak. "Yes," said their spokesperson, the corners of her mouth raised by a fraction. Duke could decode no warmth from her countenance, no interest, nothing but clinical professionalism. The smile entirely ornamental. "We're here to do whatever you need us to do." "Well, I've never had an orgy?" Her expression frosted over. "We are your staff, Mr. Guillo, not your harem." "In that case, you can get the hell out," said Duke, trying and failing to find equilibrium. God only knew if he looked as much of a wreck as he felt. "I don't need random strangers in my fucking house." "I'm sorry," said the woman, in a tone that told Duke otherwise. "But that isn't going to be possible. You said you're here to do whatever I want you to do. As far as I can tell, that's complete bullshit. You said no twice already." "That's because you're not operating within the framework given, Mr. Guillo. We can do things for you if they fit the mandate we've been assigned." It then dawned with gruesome vividity what role precisely his so-called staff possessed. They were his wardens. This was his prison. And in answer to this, he responded with a one-fingered salute. "Fuck you." And that is the short excerpt.
Wow. Well, Duke, was it?
Yep. I needed a very douchey name.
Yeah. The only difference, he does sound like a Chad.
He does. He so does.
Amazing. Well, yeah, like I said, if anyone has any questions, obviously you're not going to reveal the story to us. That would be ridiculous. But yeah, so is that from early on? Is that like right at the beginning?
It's about right after the first chapter.
Nice. Okay. So somehow Duke ends up in Iceland in trouble. Cool. I'm looking forward to it. Who would like to go next? Kaelyn?
I can go next.
I'm terrified.
So the part I'm reading is a little bit into the first act. Main character Lee, who is the community manager of this commune, has just gotten back from talking one of her newest members, Robin, down off the ledge because Robin was starting to think that there might be something weird and unethical about how much blood donations the commune organizes, how many and how often. But Lee managed to calm her down, give her some context without betraying anything. Most notably that blood is in fact a renewable resource like milk or honey, which didn't quite work, but got Robin back on campus. If anybody asks, the bleached, denatured blood residue that will still linger in crevices despite how furiously I'm scrubbing all the tile tonight is poultry blood. In Oregon, if you slaughter less than 1,000 birds a year for farmers markets, or any number just for your own consumption, you don't need a license, which is good, because we don't have a license for anything else sold commercially, and we don't have any weanling pigs on private contract with customers this year. It's true we've had slaughtering processing classes here with some of our residents using last year's lambs. That would more than explain the blood, just not the timeline. But the important thing is that there's been blood in here before, there will be blood in here again. There will be no DNA left to test, and everything here is done up to the FDA standards for a regulated abattoir, even though we don't qualify, even though we'll never have an FSIS inspector here every day. There's nothing here to incriminate us. But I'm still paranoid. This is the most dangerous thing we do, especially on nights like tonight when things get messy. This guy was something else. He's always left a mess, but this time he crossed a line, spread the blood around, made a game of it. It's pathological, and money or no, the commune isn't going to survive if people like him think they can break the rules just because they're donors. What a mess. And it doesn't help that I'm on edge, maybe because of going out with Robin earlier. Robin, because she is perfect and incredible and clearly felt alive after our outing, is finishing the soup for me. When we got back to campus, I checked in with Lucille at the office and let her know I'd take care of the rest of the evening. She was gone without a word. That left me to head back to the kitchen until our stakeholder arrived. It was only 1 a.m, so I had a few hours left to finish cooking before then. I could handle it all as long as I focused. And then I found Robin there waiting for me in the kitchen. I should have been annoyed. I should have sent her off to bed as kindly as I could. It wouldn't have been hard. She was buzzed, and it was late. But instead, we sat up and talked about the city and about art while I turned the oven back on. When it was time to load up the color-designated pots half an hour later, she fetched the canned homemade stock, half vegetable, half chicken, for all our very nutritional needs, and we were still basking in each other's company by the time my phone buzzed. The soup wasn't finished. It had another half an hour to go, minimum, and then it needed to be pureed and canned. But it was time for blood and a mess Robin could not be allowed to see. I must have let my consternation show. I must have been too relaxed. Was definitely too relaxed, because she asked if there was a problem. What I should have done. Said no. Told her it was almost 3 a.m. and she should go to sleep. Promised her I could finish up alone, then put the soup on the back burner for a few hours. What I did. Hesitated, said I needed to get back to my office, couldn't tell her there'd be a visitor who visits commune at 3 a.m, but the soup would keep, and don't worry. And Robin, perfect Robin, drunk Robin, was right there ready to take over. She didn't even ask if Lucille could step in and finish the soup. Of course, she couldn't. She wouldn't. She doesn't care for that sort of thing anymore, just old architecture and beautiful books, but that would have given me another opening if Robin had asked, another chance to lie and do my job properly. So here I am, an hour and a half later, scrubbing blood that isn't poultry blood off the tiles, not knowing if Robin has been reasonable and knocked off to bed, or if she's still waiting, wondering, adding to her list of questions. I thought I nipped in the bud. What should I tell her when I finish up? Especially since she's already worried about the blood donations. I can't tell her I was cleaning up a late night mess in the slaughter room. Something else about the animals, maybe? No, she could figure out that was a lie. A medical emergency? Even easier to debunk. Nothing at all because it isn't her business. Except she trusts me. She likes me. When I finally finished bleaching and scrubbing and rinsing and, for good measure, scheduling 10 chickens for slaughter the next day under a fake customer number, I go and shower until there's no coppery sweet scent of blood or tang of bleach left on me. It takes extra time, but not too much, and it's necessary. My hair is short, it dries quickly. By the time I walk back to the kitchen, there's no trace of damp left, and I'm wearing a t-shirt with the Eco Village logo on it, the exact same logo that was on the shirt I was wearing before. I find Robin waiting there, asleep at the kitchen table. I rouse her gently and apologize. I say I must have fallen asleep at my desk, and I look embarrassed, and I thank her for finishing the soup. Say it smells delicious. It does, but doesn't quite mask the scent memory from that damn room. Tell her to get some rest, because the pressure canner will take at least another half hour to come up to temp. I think for a moment she's going to argue and try to stay, but she's too sleepy, and this is all so mundane, the excuse so boring, that it barely registers as anything worth questioning. I simply walk her back to Hawthorne House and bid her goodnight. I all but tuck her into bed. And then I go and clean the slaughter room again and say a silent thanks that there's no body to get rid of. I like to describe this as the book You meets lesbian vampires on a farming commune. It has a lot of similarities in tone of, I know what's best for you.
I also really want a limited edition copy where you're the narrator. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent reading. Thank you so much. And are you ready, Genevieve?
I am. So the selection I chose was kind of when my main character, Clea, is about halfway down the rabbit hole to being a total, totally kind of consumed by the cult, who she thinks is just her new friends. Even though her one friend is like, it's a cult, and Clea's like, no, it's fine, everything's fine.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
And earlier in that evening, the obvious vampire, Finn, had given her an address and a backpack full of spray paint and told her to go, tag an art gallery. So that's the part I'm going to read. And it picks up with her walking down the street, hoping she's not too noticeable at 5 in the morning. So finally, she reached her destination, and she pulled the scarf tighter over her nose and mouth, both to hide her face, but also to keep her warm. It was an art gallery, and a high-end one at that, down a side street. Thank God for that, Clea thought. But she was still wary. She checked and double-checked the address, making sure it was the right place. They matched perfectly. She took out the first can of spray paint with shaking hands, took off her glove, put her forefinger on the nozzle, took a deep breath, drew the symbol, then drew it again, over and over, until tiny symbols coated the art gallery's window. The sky in the east was turning a brilliant orange by the time she was done. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she began the long trek home, the empty cans rattling noisily in her bag, her breath heavy and hitched as she walked faster and faster, not running for fear of slipping on the icy sidewalk. Hey, you! Clea stumbled at the sound of the voice from behind her. Her breath caught in a small gasp as she slipped on an ice patch, and her heart stopped for a moment as she righted herself and began to sprint, not looking back. She felt more than heard her pursuer gaining on her. Her chest heaved as she willed herself to go, and the only thing she could think of was to plant her feet on the spots of bare, salted sidewalk and snow to keep herself from slipping on the ice. Let her go, it's almost up, another voice said, this one different than the first, and Clea suddenly realized she had 2 pursuers. Oh God, this was it. She was going to jail. There was a long break between buildings as she crossed a large, empty street that was closed for construction. But barricades enclosed the narrow stretch of sidewalk on both sides to protect Columbus's heavy pedestrian traffic. On her right, the orange street sunlight was so bright now that she had to put a hand up to shield her eyes against it. When she reached the other side of the street, a horrible screech sounded from behind her, and she found herself sliding to a stop. After several heavy breaths, she turned around and saw that her pursuer had stopped halfway across the street and was backing up, hissing and covering the side of his face with one hand, the side facing the sunrise. From where she stood, she could see that the skin of his hand was blistered and burned. And when he lowered his hand and staggered backward to rejoin his friend, who was hiding in the shadow of a building on the other side of the street, she could see that the skin of his face was in equally bad shape. Confused, Clea's eyes met her second pursuer's. It was a kid not older than she was, in an anorak and jeans, and he was giving her a look of utmost loathing. Then he bared his fangs at Clea. Actual, honest-to-God fangs. Sorry, I lost my place. The empty sunlit sidewalk sprawled like an impassable river between them, and he regarded her with utmost hatred as he dragged his friend to his feet, and they both fled the way they'd come, keeping to the shadows as they ran. Clea's mouth was open, but all she could do was take short, ragged gasps, like she was choking on air. Her stomach churned, and she doubled over and dry heaved onto the sidewalk. She wobbled forward and sank onto a bench, willing herself to just take deep breaths. That couldn't have just happened. I must have just imagined it, but I didn't. When she managed to get her heart rate down, she hauled herself to her feet and started back down the sidewalk, trembling beneath her parka. The rattle of the cans in her backpack was deafening. A few times she thought she heard sirens behind her, but when she dared to glance over her shoulder, she saw only the lightning sky, no red and blue blinking lights. Jade was right, was all she could think. Not like Clea could tell her friend what just happened. Who'd believe her? And if she were Jade, the next thing she would do was to stop playing along and just meet with Finn, demand answers, be forceful about it. But Clea was not Jade. And this thing with Finn, whatever it was all she had. When she was about halfway home, her frozen fingers fumbled to get her phone out of her pocket so she could send him a text. Done. What's next?
Gotta unmute myself. There we go. Hey, excellent work.
Yay!
I love the empathy and the voices.
Yeah. Yeah, you should be VOing for these. Like the characters really comes through in all of these. There's Duke the douchebag, and then the very empathetic Tagger. So yeah, I guess that's one thing that I was wondering. Obviously, those were wonderful readings, but the actual eventual book that you will be able to buy is an audiobook. So I guess tell the decision between print and audio.
So Voyager is trying something new. They and Paradox are trying something new, and they're doing something audio first, which means it will only be available as an audiobook for the first year. And then next summer, it'll be ebook and print and all that fun stuff. Part of it, I think, is just because of how popular audio media is right now. I think some of it's also because it let us get something out a little bit faster. And also because these are just such personal stories, not obviously all in first person, but very intimate stories that listening to them and with good voice actors will really give them a lot of life, so to say. But yeah, it's been interesting writing, knowing that people's first encounter with it will probably be as an audiobook, which is a little bit different than what I usually do.
Yeah, how does that change what anyone does? Does it at all? Like, you think about how you're writing differently?
So yeah, go ahead, Cass.
No, I was going to say I didn't think about it, but I get a feeling that you really thought it through, Kaelyn.
Well, okay, part of this is because I can't remember if it was a blog post or I was talking to him or a panel or something, but John Scalzi specifically writes his books to be tuned for audio as opposed to print only. And so I kind of picked up some of his tricks. Most of that is reducing the number of dialogue tags. So you don't have the author saying, or the reader saying, she said, over and over again. And a lot of it to me is just, I always read over it out loud towards the end to help me catch typos and problems. But when I was reading this one out loud, I did it a couple times. I was specifically listening to myself and trying to make sure that everything had a good rhythm to it.
That's awesome. I also wasn't thinking about it when I was writing.
Fair enough.
I was going back through, but not the first draft.
Okay, first draft, no. Oh, yeah. And also my first draft mostly got thrown out the window and had to be rewritten because the first draft was literally a farming memoir. It was full on like James Rebanks's The Shepherd's Life. It was, and David's like, that's very nice. But this is about sheep, not vampires. I was like, I'll make it about sheep and vampires. There's still a lot of sheep.
I don't know if anyone's seen. Oh damn! What's that film where all the sheep end up eating people? That's,
oh god,
Black Sheep,
yes.
New Zealand horror movie.
That's a great film.
Weird and good.
He's like, and you need to make the sheep more of a metaphor instead of just sheep.
Sheep are sheep. Stardew Vampire, chat says. Okay, we've had some questions in chat, and I've also got some that I'd love to ask before we end in about 10-ish minutes, I think. But yeah, let's go with the Avondrell. If I pronounce your name wrong, it's tough in chat. Sorry. The Avondrell, which vampire... Start again. Which vampire stories do authors recommend?
I actually, off the top of my head, I really like the one that Del Toro co-wrote with, God, I cannot remember the other writer's name. I'm so sorry. The Shrine. Mostly because I've always been kind of fascinated with the biology of monsters. And in that series, he goes really into detail about his variation down to the idea that his vampires kind of piss and shit as they drink because they don't actually need to absorb it the way human beings do. So they're kind of like bats. There was this thing about their tongues being proboscis. And they go for the throat because that is the most exposed, but they really prefer the artery on the thigh. So if you like just outright gross, I would recommend the Shrine.
I have two recommendations. One is I think novelette. The other is movie. Start with the movie. Only Lovers Left Alive. If you haven't seen it, you really should. It is a great study of sort of a relationship across time, but also how it doesn't make mental illness go away, and it doesn't fix relationship problems. But it's also just it's a Jim Jarmusch movie, and it's just very moody and atmospheric and relaxing. And Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston are very attractive in it, and also Kit Marlowe is in it as a vampire. The other one is a story called Small Changes Over Long Periods of Time by K.M. Sparrow. It is about a trans guy who gets turned into a vampire, and it is about the nitty-gritty, what that technology and how he negotiates his relationship with the vampire who turned him, because it wasn't a long-term relationship, and suddenly it's become one. It's extremely good. Highly recommend it. Super great.
That is going on my to be read list like now. I honestly haven't read a vampire book in a while. I devoured them when I was younger. But I guess my recommendation is also a show/movie. I am a big fan of What We Do in the Shadows.
Yes.
Me too. It is
That's brilliant.
exactly my sense of humor. Like it's just so, they're just like poking fun at like all of these vampire tropes. And I love it. I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, me too. Well, I'm not an author, but I can recommend a series I've just finished called Vampires. It is a French series about a girl who suddenly discovers that she is a vampire, and they do all the normal vampire things like drinking blood, and they can't go out in the day, but she's different, she's special, she can go out in sunlight, and like it gets really messy, like high school drama, a little bit of, but then also like this weird creepy family theme running through it, like where's her dad, like how did she come about as this special vampire. There's all sorts, it gets really gross, and there's lots of blood everywhere all the time.
The Netflix Castlevania series, also very fun, very gory, very delightful.
Yeah, I always enjoyed that one, but the one thing I thought was, while they were recording the voiceovers, they must have clearly told the voice actors to be like, you're at a 10, we need you at a 1. No enthusiasm in your voices, please. It's weird, but I do enjoy that one.
I just like it because it goes into the vampires are monsters. They're not just fancy humans.
Yeah.
Which I like even if it's just a subtle difference, I really like that difference in psychology, and that difference in worldview that can come around.
Yeah, that's something I enjoy as well, where like when you're immortal, you look at time and society differently. Like, I interject my own question here. Was there something that you thought the Vampire the Masquerade vampires kind of perspective was different about how you would portray them than a normal character who, I guess, isn't immortal or can do the things they can do?
What I ran into, which became part of why the story was so fun to write, is that in Vampire the Masquerade, the less human you get psychologically, the less human you can act. It's very hard to lie and pretend that you are a human if you are old, or if you are extremely violent, or if you've lost all your touchstones. And so here I am writing this character who needs to be the most human. But at the same time, she's treating her human community members the same as she treats her sheep. And she thinks this is wonderful and a completely reasonable thing because she's taking care of all of them and they're all happy. And they, she's protecting all of them and keeping them fed and watered and sheltered. And but it turns out that if you think of people that way, you aren't really holding on to your humanity. And so that starts having physiological consequences that she cannot control, but that she also doesn't understand because she's gotten herself into this headspace where, well, to me, I feel fine doing this. So, this seems like a completely reasonable thing. So I'm not being a monster.
Kind of riffing on that, I think one of the things that really fascinated me about the setting was the idea of how the Ventru work, their history, the kind of layers and complexities they've kind of introduced into the world, how they've accumulated power, money. And Duke definitely is a tech bro that deals very strongly in immediate gratification. So he works in the idea of months, and humanity in general, if we're smart, we think in context of the idea of decades. But eventually think in millennia. And it was a really interesting thing to kind of dig into that mentality and see how they would approach manipulation, how they would confront the idea of somebody being angry at them and just kind of shrug it off because they have all the fucking time in the world. And that is kind of terrifying, people with too much time.
In the case of my story, I was thinking more about how, because again, what stood out to me in the lore was the conflict between the Anarchs and the Camarilla or Camarilla. I've heard it said both ways. But you figure the Anarchs or think that they're doing the right thing. And I tried to think about how that would translate to okay, how would you recruit more people to a cause like this? You're saying we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And what kind of tools would you use to get humans to kind of work with you, I guess? There's
also the element that they've added that vampires cannot safely use a lot of communications technology.
Right.
That they are being watched by human governments who do have the ability to kick their asses with enough firepower. And so they used to, back in the early 2000s setting, they had, what was it called? ShrekNet or something. They had a dark web community where they could talk, but it got infiltrated. So now they don't have anything like that. And you can get in trouble if you're part of the Camarilla and you are calling people on the phone. So that's part of how I even came up with the idea of the commune, is that this is basically, it's a body laundering or a blood laundering thing where, they're raising sheep for slaughter and they're selling those and people are buying them and eating those sheep, but they have the customer, the customer buys a particular sheep, a share in a sheep, and that animal's ID number is also tied to somebody at the commune so that you can have paperwork that would pass an easy inspection. They would pass a pretty deep inspection, but that if you are the people running the commune, the code to switch over and who's bought the share of what and all of this. So, they can just, there are times where Lee is texting people, what about that pollination contract this spring for your fields? And she is not actually talking about bees, except sometimes she is also actually talking about bees. And it was really fun to kind of come up with very not only clever ways around the communications limitations, but ones that are even more disturbing. I'm a big fan of whenever there is a logistical problem in a story to the writer, that you should take the chance to use its solution to make your character's life as horrible as possible, or to completely disturb and distress your audience if the two aren't the same. So.
Nice. All right, we've got a couple more questions before we wrap up. And this is from Linda Rinadadesu.
She's one of my coworkers.
Oh, wonderful. Well, they ask, was reading your story aloud during your review editing process even more important because it's an audiobook?
I did not write this with the mind of like.
Yeah. I guess we've got.
So this might be Caitlin's question.
Yeah, and it was important, but I didn't do it early on because I knew everything was going to change. So I tried to wait until it was mostly settled. It takes a long time to read a book out loud. I'm not sure if you know that, because I sure didn't until I did the same thing with my final proofing for The Luminous Dead, and I would read 50 pages a day, and that would take me anywhere between an hour to 2 hours. And some of that's taking breaks to change stuff, but a lot of it is just, it takes time, and then your throat is wrecked for the rest of the day. So I honestly don't know how audiobook readers do it. I have a lot of respect for them because I could absolutely not record for an 8-hour day.
I'm also going to say I have a lot of respect for like streamers for just doing it consistently every day while still being distracted by a video game and a chat window. I would just melt into a puddle of like complete uselessness within the first 15 minutes. I don't know how you guys do it.
It also takes a little bit of a ramp up period because for the first like 5 to 10 pages, I think I just sound like the world's biggest idiot and that the writing is terrible, but it's just because I'm hyper focused on it and haven't gotten into a rhythm. So like the urge to run away and set fire to the copy that I'm reading is very, very high. But apparently my husband likes to kind of lurk outside my office and listen while I'm reading out loud. Apparently it's very soothing.
Yeah, that does sound fun. It will sound good when it's finally a full audiobook as well. Who else do we have? There's the Avondrell, who says, if we have enough time, a favourite vampire character. Preaches Cassidy.
Cassidy's my favorite.
I do like Cassidy because he's a bit.
The first introduction, yes. The first introduction to him where he just bites into someone's neck, and I got to see what happens when human maulers tears out a throat. Like, that was a defining moment for me in my life. I like the gross stuff. I don't know if anyone can tell.
Hit the floor after jumping out plane. Yeah, sorry.
Lestat. I'm going to be basic. Anne Rice was also super formative for me, so it's one of my faves.
Nadia from the What We Do in the Shadows TV show. She delights me.
The smartest one. I love her so much.
And also, I'm blanking on her name, which is horrible, but the college girl that Nadia turns.
Yeah.
I love them both.
They're a good pair. That's a fun depiction of like the vampire siring a person.
And the absolute confusion that ensues and bad parenting, honestly. Yeah. Subpar parenting. Vampires are not good at parenting. What I really kind of want to see now is like a vampire who maybe had a largish family as a human or worked in childcare or something, or was a high school teacher in particular, who's turned and basically is the best mom, the best vampire mom. Not like the sweetest, gentlest, but actually helps you adjust and get through stuff.
It's weird.
I think that'd be really fun.
Currently playing a game streamed on Twitch, and my character's sire is like that, is like the person who everyone dumps their kids onto and does vampire daycare. He's aside from the shady side of him, he's really lovely person.
That is an awesome thing.
Yeah. It was a bit unusual because we were all expecting him to be dark and like spooky, but like no, he was really nice and chill. All right. I think there's one more question, and we can go over that before the end. And that is, Misabi, what inspiration do you as authors draw from your other writings or the writings of your favorite authors, if when you're changing up the genre or general style you're writing in?
I think in many ways. So I'm definitely a prose stylist. I'm in love with the idea of language and how language just works. To go into sidebar very briefly, one of my favorite writers in the world right now is Frances Harding. I read her first book, and A Face Like Glass, and I absolutely devoured it. I promptly bought everything else in her backlist, ate through the whole thing, squeaked in frustration at the fact there was nothing else to read. And then I realized that all of her books were intended for children between ages of 10 and 13. And that kind of gave me pause because she was using really simple language, but she was also crafting an incredible amount of like beautiful prose, proving you don't really need $10 words to be able to convey sophistication. And like, I think that is in general what I look for in other people's writing, the kind of inspiration. I think just how do people mess around with English and what you can accomplish with the same set of words.
Obviously, I really enjoy farming memoirs. Like I mentioned, the one by James Rebanks is fantastic. There's a book about bees by Sue Hubble that's amazing. I read a book just called The Cow Book that was amazing. And a lot of those farming memoirs also they are not just about farming, they're about family and everything else. And a lot of those memoirs are also beautifully written because in many cases, sometimes it's just the farmers are really great at writing, just from almost ether. They just happen to have that skill set. And some of them are written by people who are recovering academics and recovering novelists. And so it's really interesting reading the breadth of how, not only how they work with their animals, but how they write about their animals and how they write about their experience. The other thing that I like to keep in mind a lot, though, is I write stories that have a lot of themes in common with each other. This one, not so much, just because I don't usually write contemporary and I don't usually write large cast. But in general, a lot of my other work has to do with people who are choosing to self-isolate and have trauma in their past and are grieving, and there are ghosts of some kind around, and there are all these similar things. So I feel like I have to make all of the prose distinct between each book, or else they will feel like the same book, even though the plots are different. So I have to change the plot and I have to change the sound of the book if I'm going to keep talking about the same stuff over and over again from different angles.
I know Jen is about to answer her own answer, so I'm desperately curious about the connection between her academic work and her writing. I really just want to hear more about that.
Whose?
Yours?
Mine?
Yes.
Oh.
I can be a fan. I read your work. I'm allowed to be a fan of yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess like one of the things that I enjoy both in reading and writing is taking tropes and kind of taking readers' expectations and either like leaning into them or like totally subverting them, which is one of the things that I enjoyed about the series What We Do in the Shadows, where, you know, this college student that Nadia turns is like the least likely candidate to be a vampire, I think, in the whole show, besides their what's his name's poor familiar,
Guillermo
wants to be a vampire, but that's so that's kind of a little bit what I was going for in this vampire story, because Clea is like your also like your least likely candidate to be a main character in this sort of story. But like from an academic standpoint, I kind of go with like trying to subvert people's expectations, because like the book that I'm working on right now is about like a surly 10th century Norwegian milkmaid. Like you think like Viking women, but like this girl, like she just wants to go home. She's like has Bilbo Baggins levels of not wanting to go on an adventure. And I feel like the 21st century obsession with like women as warriors in the Viking age, like it just bothers me. So I'm like, I'm gonna write about a milkmaid instead.
If please.
Yeah. So that's I guess the academic connection there. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I honestly would love to continue talking about vampires and all the books and things you love. But one final question before we wrap up and say where we can find all the stuff. Favorite vampire clan? Go.
Too easy.
Zombra.
This is another one that I don't know how to pronounce. Bruja.
Oh yeah.
Bruja.
Yeah. I've heard it all kinds of different ways.
Philosopher Kings.
They
All the
rock.
Philosopher Kings.
Yeah, good choice. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on this podcast. I had a great time. So does someone know when and where you can find Walk Among Us?
It's somewhere. Yes.
I think it comes out on the 16th of June.
Does it?
I think it's around then. Whatever that Tuesday is.
Okay, I will put there's a HarperCollins link.
Yes.
In
and you can get it through Audible. You can get it through any place you buy audiobooks. I'm not super familiar with audiobooks, so I'm not actually sure. And also remember, you can ask your library to order it and have it downloadable to your phone through your library. Please do. We love libraries.
Excellent. Oh yeah. And where can we find everyone via social media or any other things that they'd like to promote before we wrap?
I am on Twitter at Khaw, and basically everything that I ever promote is there. So just follow me there because I'm really bad at remembering I have a Facebook page.
Same. I'm Iron Witchy on Twitter. I'm the most active on there when it comes to book stuff.
On Twitter, I am SEE_Starling. And I also have a website, CaelynStarling.com, that's got everything, including pictures of some body parts I helped design a couple years ago, and some knitting. So you can find everything over there. But I'm most active on Twitter if you actually want to get a hold of me.
Excellent. And yeah, if you want to, if you've missed any of this, then it will be available on Strange Adventures on YouTube. I'll put the whole thing up and send the link out to everyone. There will be links in the description in YouTube. There have been a couple of links in the description Twitch chat. So until then, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time. And we will hopefully promote the next fully booked stream.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.